Cervantes y luego pasamos a la de Shakespeare. Eh, el tema que nos convoca el día de hoy tiene que ver con las remesas y su impacto en la migración. Durante más de 4 décadas quizá, sobre todo en la relación México-Estados Unidos, ustedes han percibido que las medidas que se han buscado para atenuar la migración han sido básicamente de orden judicial, de orden policíaco, tener una patrulla fronteriza más fuerte, tener perros, tener drones, poner muros, etcétera, etcétera. Y lo que vemos es que van pasando los años y el tema simplemente no se administra adecuadamente. Conste que no sé la palabra, no se soluciona porque no es una cuestión que se vaya a solucionar, es algo que hay que administrar correctamente y ese debe ser el objetivo, digamos, que se debe perseguir. Se trata de seres humanos, no se trata de objetos, digamos, inanimados y hay un tratamiento que se tiene que dar a la migración pues de acuerdo a esos estándares humanos. Eh, el día de hoy vamos a explorar un área que los gobiernos en general en esta parte del mundo, empezando por el de Estados Unidos y el de México, no han visualizado adecuadamente en su potencial. Y estamos hablando de las remesas que mandan los paisanos a sus lugares de origen en México. Me voy a concentrar en México, Estados Unidos básicamente, tocaremos por ahí algo de Centroamérica también y del Caribe, y quizá Colombia y Venezuela inevitablemente también, pero en el foco México-Estados Unidos señalaría que el año pasado el flujo de remesas que enviaron los paisanos a México fueron más de 60,000 millones de dólares. Estamos hablando de más o menos 4 veces más que la inversión extranjera que recibe México. Imagínense de lo que estamos hablando. Y no vemos el impacto laboral, el impacto económico, el impacto en desarrollo que sí suele traer la inversión extranjera. Quiere decir esto que la mayoría de esos recursos, de esos 60,000 millones de dólares que mandan los mexicanos que viven en Estados Unidos, se van a consumo y se van a gasto corriente. Entonces el reto que tenemos el día de hoy, ahora los voy a presentar a los panelistas, es cómo traducir o llevar a que esas remesas tengan un mayor impacto en el desarrollo de los países receptores. Les decía 60,000 millones de dólares en el caso mexicano, pero por ejemplo en el caso de El Salvador, 1 de cada 4 dólares que circulan en la economía salvadoreña vienen de remesas. El 25% del PIB del Salvador son remesas. Y tampoco están sacándole el jugo, digamos, suficiente como para que se detone un desarrollo francamente muy dinámico en ese país, como ocurre también en México y en las zonas a donde llega ese dinero en México. Entonces, sin mayor preámbulo, y voy a cambiar hacia el inglés, voy a presentar a nuestros panelistas. A mi derecha está el doctor Dilip Ratha, quien es he's, the leading figure for the World Bank on remittances, and he's been recently to India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and where else have you been recently?
Bhutan, Kenya.
Bhutan in Kenya. He will tell us about the Kenyan project that is very interesting, seems to me. They call it the diaspora bonus. To his right is my dear friend Domenika Lynch. She is the leading person and the director for the Latinos and Society program at the Aspen Institute. So she has all these contacts in the United States with the Latino community. And she's been devoted lots of time recently to spark and aggrandize the potential of economic development for Latinos in the United States, how they are becoming a true force in the US. And then, last but not least, Diego Deleersnyder, he is at the Latinos and Society program as well. He's Argentinian and he's an expert on these issues of digitalization and financial inclusion, which is absolutely necessary if we are going to change the scope and nature of remittances into financial resources and into development programs. So, without more introduction, I will leave the floor for Dr. Ratha, which is going to give us a scope of how remittances are moving in the world in general, and how these remittances could actually be turned into funds or into sources of development for nations like Mexico. So, Dilip, you have the floor. Thank you very much for being here, the three of you, by the way, and thank you all here as well.
Thank you. My my Spanish is not great. I'm learning, so it'll take another couple of years before I can speak in Spanish. But thank you very much, Enrique, for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to be with Domenika and Diego in this panel and in this beautiful international book fair. It's very dear to me to be in a book fair. I have not been in an international book fair. I'm looking forward uh, to visiting some stalls out there. Um, Remittances are the reason why people move. When people can't um, take care of themselves and their families, they become desperate to find a way to support themselves and their families. And that's why the possibility of getting a job outside and then sending back money is the one that drives people to move. So in a way, remittances precede the desire to send remittances precedes migration, and without migration, remittances can't happen. So these two phenomena are intricately linked. And just to point out that uh, the number of migrants internationally, international migrants, that's total number of migrants, is 301 million. That's about 3.5% of the world's population, which means that 90.
Sorry, those are international migrants, right?
Yes,
Not okay. Yeah.
yes.
All right.
International migrants are 301 million
Worldwide.
worldwide, and um, that's only 3.5% of the world's population, which also means that 96.5% of the population does not migrate internationally. So migration is the exception rather than the rule. And these 300 million people send money home, small amounts, $100, $200 in the case of Mexico, $300 to $400 per month. And because probably 180, 200 million people send money home to developing countries, this money, these small sums of money sent month after month, they add up to very large numbers. So by the latest count, we are expecting remittances this year in 2024. So this month, the year will end. And by the end of the year, we will have about 682 billion is our latest estimate, almost $700 billion flowing to developing countries. That's only officially measured, officially recorded data, 682 billion flowing only to developing countries. Canadians send money to Americans. Americans also send money to Canada. And the other way, all the developed countries, they have more migration among themselves than developing countries among themselves, which means remittances among developed countries is also large. So the worldwide flow of remittances is more like close to $900 billion, 850 billion that we can count, out of which developing countries are about 700 billion. And out of that, about 164 billion or so is Latin America and the Caribbean region. And out of that, this year, looks like we will have about 67 to 68 billion flowing to Mexico by the end of the year. So that's the worldwide numbers. Now let's do a contrast. 700 billion flowing to developing countries, foreign direct investment from all the multinationals of the world, all the multinational big companies of the world, it's only about 380 billion, about half. All the foreign aid, including aid from the World Bank and American donors, the United States of America, the largest donor on the planet, all of the official aid adds up to about 256 billion. Remittances sent by poor people in small amounts, in other words, are larger now than all the foreign direct investment and all the official aid combined. And that is only officially recorded number. The real number, including flows that do not go through official channels, would be about $1 trillion. So in Nigeria, remittances are about 20 odd billion dollars, larger than the revenue they get from oil exports. Same in Mexico. Remittances to Mexico are larger than the money that is generated by Pemex. And it is larger than all the foreign direct investment, including all the American and German and Chinese investment that is coming in. And in Egypt, remittances are larger than about 7 times the size of revenue from Suez Canal. In Morocco, they're larger than tourism receipts. In Nepal, they're significantly larger than tourism receipts. In Sri Lanka, they're larger than tea exports. In India, they're comparable to IT exports. Remittances are truly a financial lifeline for poor countries. The other interesting thing about remittances, which is why this topic has just not gone away over the last 20 years since it was sort of discovered. The other important thing about remittances is that when Mexico had tequila crisis, foreign direct investment, capital flows, private flows through the bond market, stock market, they left the country. They were negative. They did not come in, they left the country. Remittances increased. When Philippines, Thailand had crisis, Nepal had earthquake, Pakistan had earthquake, Haiti had earthquake, Philippines had typhoons, El Salvador and Central American countries had cyclones. Remittances goes in. So when the family back home is in trouble, whether it is because of natural disasters, whether it is because of pandemic, whether it is because of political crisis or economic crisis, money comes in, does not go out. So this is the important thing. It's counter-cyclical. It acts like an insurance. The other important factor about remittances is that because it is sent by a migrant to the family, a migrant who is a family member, and the migrant has gone out just to be able to help the family, the money that comes in is very well targeted to the needs of the people. So these are sort of three reasons I mentioned why remittances are so important to anyone interested in reducing poverty, sharing prosperity, and in development in general. Large size, foreign exchange flows, counter-cyclical, acts like an insurance, and it is very well targeted to the needs of the people.
So you can see the importance of this issue. The numbers are staggering, really. I mean, just $700 billion moving from, say, north to south in the world. And if we include foreign direct investment, it amounts to roughly $1 trillion in the world. So it's a huge amount of money. It's pretty much the economy of Mexico. Uh, well, Mexico is $1.5 trillion worth of GDP, but it's three-quarters of Mexico's economy that is moving. Can you imagine moving three-quarters of Mexico's economy elsewhere in the world? That is what is happening. And my concern, and I have shared this with my friends here, is that we are not making the most out of it. I mean, it's a huge amount of money, and we don't see that except for what Dilip was saying on the insurance that is for families back home. But it's not necessarily the best scenario. And I was bringing at the beginning and the introduction the issue of having more border patrol, having larger walls, all that stuff, and it's not working. What if remittances are going to be the antidote, if you will, for unnecessary migration, right? that some development programs in Michoacán or Oaxaca or here in Jalisco can actually become a source of employment, a source of wealth for Jalisco, for Michoacán, and so on and so forth, instead of just using them to buy chicken or to buy groceries at the supermarket. So it seems to me, and this is just a provocative argument here, that we are not making the most out of these remittances. Domenika, would you like to elaborate on this with your skills on how the Latinos view these things in the States, how you perceive this whole process worldwide and between Mexico and the United States, if possible?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me. I've had the pleasure of working with Enrique now for a couple years. Sí hablo español, pero por respetar a Dilip, hablamos en inglés ahora. Primeramente, carrera, my career, sorry, my brain just switched.
Okay.
My career has been focused on American Latinos. And let me make it clear. Americanos look like me. They're not just white. So when our people call someone like me, oh, es hispana nomás, no es americana. Let me tell you who we are in the United States. So I'm real passionate about this because let's address why we leave some of these countries. For opportunity. For the belief that American dream says it doesn't matter where you're born, the status, class doesn't matter. If you have ganas, if you have the desire, if you have intelligence, and we all have intelligence, and you believe in God, that's my philosophy, anything's possible. You can be president of the United States. Well, not if you're an immigrant, but if you're born in the United States, you can. And so it's that sort of belief and that passion that guides so many American Latinos. So let me tell you who we are first so you understand who's sending the money. 19% of the US population, American Latinos. Out of that 19%, which is about 65 million people, 81% are US citizens. They're Americanos. Okay? So understand that. Now, if you were to look at all our accomplishments from the essential worker, the essential business, to the most highly educated and decorated Latino in the United States, you're going to see that our GDP, Latino GDP in the United States, is $3.68 trillion. We are larger than the economy of India, than the economy of the UK. We are a market. So there should be respect for that in terms of who we are, in terms of our economic base power. We are increasingly becoming more educated. Latinas, we're kicking ass, right? Close to 200% of Latinas now in terms of master's degrees, that's who's earning it. In terms of businesses, 2 times the rate, small businesses, Latinas, Latinos, we're creating, we have 5 million businesses in the United States. We employ about 3 million people. We're, for some of us, it's some of the best days and times. And when you look at who voted and who showed up in strong numbers to vote, a lot of Latinos did. And they made a statement that the number one thing on their mind was the economy and their businesses. So first of all, understand who's sending that money. That is a whole market power that American Latinos have. Now, about 32% of Latinos in the United States are sending remittances, and a big number of that are Mexican Americans. And sort of the belief that if you're the one that left your country of origin and went to the United States, you're the chosen one, as humble as you may be, to make a difference not only in your life, but the responsibility to send money back to your family to make sure that they're well. So we got to honor that taking care of your grandma, your mom, your sister, your little brother, their education, their healthcare, that is important. And that is what drives Latinos. And during the pandemic, it was incredible. You had essential workers, majority were Latinos who were battling COVID, but they were still the ones making sure that the rest of us were fed and taken care of. And then half of that income they earned, they were sending it back to their countries of origin. And so if you see the progress before the pandemic of remittances to after the pandemic, it's incredible. We learned a lot about
Why
who we
have they
are.
remained? That's an interesting thing because the pandemic came and went, right? Or we're pretty much out of it. but the remittances have not dwindled. They have stayed there. What is your take of that? Why is it that they are not going down once the pandemic is over?
I think there's that commitment. I think the realization now that things in the United States are increasingly harder, right? What was possible 25 years ago in terms of even buying a home? I mean, in California and Los Angeles, you can't buy a home for under $1 million. And so the opportunity, I think, to build and support families where they can buy homes, support their cousins or the family's businesses, it's also sort of an idea of I'll retire, I can come back. So I think that things are shifting. And I think that particularly with Mexican Americans, the power of Mexican Americans to uplift the communities in the United States, but to uplift also Mexico is tremendous. And so that I think needs to be respected and revered. And I think that the important thing is the education. So you talked about how do we maximize? Step number
Yes,
one,
yes.
it's financial literacy, empowerment, and digital literacy. So those are the pieces that when you have that, then you can start thinking about taking the risk and investing in projects. And I think Dilip will talk more about that. But I think that sort of the commitment to the families, I think also less Mexicans are coming to the United States. What we're seeing in the border are more South Americans, Central Americans, Caribbean. And so I think that there's also that opportunity that has kept some from migrating to the United States.
Let me turn to Diego, that is a specialist on this. What are the hurdles or the obstacles that need to be overcome in order to make sure that those flows can maximize its effect in regional and national development? You're an expert on digitalization and all that kind of stuff. Is there a lack of financial education, say, that is hampering these possibilities? Is it the lack of instruments to send remittances from point A to point B? Or is it a question of digitalization of people in general that they don't have like an identity? What would you say, Diego, are the main hurdles to be overcome in the short term for a country like Mexico to maximize the impact of remittances?
Thank you, Enrique, and I take the opportunity to also agradecerles a todos por la invitación y también nuevamente decir que bueno, estamos haciendo la presentación en inglés para asegurar un mejor flujo de la conversación, pero bueno, nada, agradecerles por venir a nuestra presentación hoy y agradecerle a Enrique por la invitación también a esta presentación de hoy. So, Enrique, answering to your question, these are some of the questions that actually made us launch a new project at the Aspen Institute Latinos and Society program, where basically we were trying to look into how remittances could be an opportunity for financial inclusion and further economic development of Latinos in the US as remittance senders, but also for remittance receivers, specifically in Mexico. We were focusing in Mexico for a number of reasons. First of all, because as Domenika said, Mexicans are the largest demographic within the Latino diaspora in the US. Over 60% of Latinos in the US are of Mexican heritage. Number two, because the US-Mexico remittance corridor is nowadays the second largest in the world. So as Dilip was sharing before, is more than $64 billion. It's a very competitive corridor in particular because for its size, there is a lot of companies trying to get into that market. So you have traditional players like banks, you have fintechs, you have a lot of new companies trying to break into the market, which is something good because it brings competition and that pushes the fees and the costs lower. But a number of challenges persist. One of them being financial exclusion. So nowadays, most of remittance receivers, for example, here in Mexico, still today, they cash out the remittances. They go to a 7-Eleven, they go to a Walmart, they go to a Western Union, and they take the cash out. And there is a couple of issues with that. The first one is that money is not accruing interest because it's not in a bank account. It's not generating additional wealth. The second one is that because that money is not deposited into a bank account, the banking system is not increasing the opportunity of providing loans to local small businesses. So let's imagine, for example, if all remittances that come to Jalisco were coming to bank accounts rather than to brick and mortar stores where people are taking the cash out, all that money would not be immediately taken out. There will be some of it still deposited, and the banks will have more capital to provide loans. And that means that the el empresario jalisciense, the entrepreneur from Jalisco, would probably have better loans and better capital tools to expand their business. So financial exclusion, it is a big issue. In the case of Mexico, the latest survey in 2021 from the INEGI found that 51% of Mexicans are unbanked, don't have a bank account. So there is still a really long way to go in order to ensure that more Mexicans have access to more formal financial services, because there is also a cost to informality in financial services. When you don't have access to a bank account and you don't have access to formal credit, the alternatives are usually more expensive. You're talking about abusive players that will charge you abusive rates when trying to get a loan. So there is a cost to being unbanked. There is a cost to have low income, and we need to make sure that more and more these financial services are available and readily open to everyone, both in the US and in Mexico. And on the US side, almost 10% of Latinos are still unbanked. So it is also a challenge on the US side. This is
So
more than twice the rate
in
of
the
the
United
average
States,
American.
only 10% are bankable?
No, only 10% don't have bank accounts,
Okay, okay.
but that's
So,
twice the rate of the average American.
okay, okay.
So there is a challenge there as well.
Yeah, all right. So, cutting to the chase here on the big question on how to turn this pool of wealth into development for receiving countries. What would be your best advice, Dilip, in terms of what is it that a country like Mexico should be doing? What policies, what the banks should be doing, what kind of even advertising, if you will, or education should come along this big endeavor of developing large regions of Mexico through remittances. Is there like a recipe that you could suggest here?
Yes. First point to emphasize is that remittances are personal flows from person to person. It's people's money. They have already paid taxes, and taxes are used by governments on both sides, US and Mexico, let's say. Those taxes are for development purposes, to building roads and schools and everything, hospitals, right? The money that is coming in as remittances are personal money, and that is for personal use, and people should be free to use what they want to use it for. So first point is, don't put a decree like an order, government order, that you must use the money, only 30% for food and 10% for clothing and 30% for tractors or investments or fixing light bulbs on the street. Governments have tried it. Mexico tried it. Germany tried it. Turkey tried it in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and the guest worker programs of those days, Turkey to Germany, US, so Mexico to US. And people will do what they want to do, so it does not work. So do not order people to specifically use the money for productive purposes. That is the first point. Second point, very important to remember that remittances are large going out from United States. Official number 80 odd billion, unofficial estimates 160 billion going out from US. That's the largest migration country in the world. It's actually one of the largest countries in the world, right? The richest anyways. So the numbers don't always mean a lot, so be careful how you judge it. So when US, so much money is going out from the US, a lot of people think it's okay that a lot of US is not giving a lot of official aid. So in other words, saying that official aid is being substituted or being facilitated, complemented by remittances. I think, again, remember that remittances are private money. People have already paid taxes, and then they are sending their own money to themselves or to their family. Don't think of that as government's money that is going to be given out, a part of that as official aid. So remittances and aid are not comparable. Do not touch remittances because you are not able to increase aid and there is a need to fight climate change. You want to.
Remittances don't have political strings.
No,
I
exactly.
mean, as opposed to official aid that you say, okay, you have to use them for this purpose. Otherwise, I'm going to give it to you, right?
Yeah. So that's the second point, that official aid is not, don't think of remittances to substitute official aid. Official aid has its purpose. When you want to do public things, you really have to increase it. There is no other alternative. Then comes the point, what can we do about remittances? If it is private money, what can we do? It has to be indirect. It has to be incentive compatible with what people want. So if the investment climate in Mexico is not good, people will not invest it when they have money. So improve the business climate. That would be something. If the money is coming in small amounts and people are spending a lot in paying the money transfer companies because they don't have bank accounts, they don't have digital wallets, they don't have financial literacy. So they go to money transfer companies and pay 5%, 7%, 10% of the money to send money home. I'll give you an anecdote. 99, the year 99 and 2002, between 99 and 2002, the cost of sending money to Mexico declined by 56%. I remember this because I had measured it. And after that, it has fallen only a little bit, maybe 5%. Mexican remittance costs are not small. Why would you pay 5% of the money that you receive? It's your own money, 5%. I mean, phone call, I can make phone calls everywhere in the world and do video calls these days. Remember how costly it used to be? I have paid sometimes $13 a minute to make a phone call in the 20 years ago, and definitely $1.50, $2 per minute to make phone calls, right? And now it is free and it is video. Remittances can go through digital channels from wallet to wallet for free. Not only that, I have gone on record saying that remittance cost should be actually negative because they bring people to the shop or to the banks. Shops and banks can use remittances as a loss leader to sell other things. That is an important agenda because in Mexico it doesn't seem that important, but some parts of Latin America and the Caribbean region, especially smaller countries, the cost of sending money can be easily 6 to 7%. Sending money to Africa, the cost is on average 8%. And within Africa, where about half of the remittances comes within Africa, the cost of sending money can be 12, 13, 14%. Once I recorded 30% cost. If remittance cost goes down, people will send more money more frequently. Small amounts more frequently, and that's why the total amount will go up. It's an interesting lesson for money transfer industry. The cost elasticity of remittances is highly elastic, meaning that you reduce the cost of remittances by 1%, the flow of remittances will increase by more than 1%, and profits for the remittance company will actually increase. So decrease the cost, profit increases. How about that? Most remittance companies don't do that. And this is where Mexico could actually play a role. And there are two things it can do. One is price transparency. Mexico was the leader for the Profeco database. I remember they used to collect data from different cities in the US, how much it cost to send money by different channels from Chicago to different cities in Mexico. That was the first database on remittances in the early 2000s. And inspired by that, we created in the World Bank remittance prices worldwide database. That's a G20 goal, and there's also a Sustainable Development Goal indicator to reduce remittance costs to 3% by 2030. I think it could be zero, but okay, we agreed on 3%. And here is the bad news. Here is the bad news. It will never be achieved. The way we are going, remittance cost will not go below 3% in my lifetime. I don't know how long I have to live. So that's because of the foreign exchange premium. There was this beautiful experiment between US and Mexico through the Fed, US Fed, and Bank of Mexico Federal Automatic Clearinghouse System, and they started a Directo a Mexico program. You could send any amount of money from the US to Mexico for, I think it was 69 cents, not a percent of how much you send, but 69 cents, whether you send $1 or $1 million. And on this side, Bank of Mexico will give out the pesos because there is a requirement that the money will be given out in pesos. They were going to charge, I think, 0.22%, meaning less than a quarter percent as foreign exchange markup to convert the money. The market and the banks normally charge 3 to 5%. Bank of Mexico was going to do it at 0.22%. Guess what happened? The bankers boycotted that system. That system exists, but very little money flows through that. I would say US and Mexico should get on that and get that going. Get that going, you know. Okay,
But funnily, sorry for interrupting, but funnily, uh, instead of going that in that direction of reducing as possibly to zero the cost of transfers, now you see that they want to tax it, right? To make money out of the workers in the United States by sending money to their relatives. But you were telling me something very interesting. We always think of a Mexican living in Chicago sending money to his mother in Oaxaca, right? But what about somebody, a German citizen working for Siemens in Tennessee, sending money to his aunt in Munich? Is that going to be charged as well? Would they have taxes for them? Or so you cannot discriminate against just a certain group of people. So that will prompt a black market, a huge black market in the United States, and possibly the largest money laundering operation ever. Am I sort of right?
you are absolutely right because as I pointed out before, um, employers who are hiring migrants, they are already paying taxes. In fact, undocumented migrants in the US also pay taxes. And there was another beautiful experience. I remember Ambassador Carlos Sada when he was a consul general in Chicago. Uh, I think he might have started it or it was there already in the. I actually went and attended a meeting of at the Mexican embassy or consulate in Chicago way back in 2004 with the local community banks. They had started a program of how to increase um, banking services, access to banking services for Mexican migrants. And in that experiment, the bankers pointed out a beautiful thing. They said that for any foreigner to get a housing loan is allowed. It is fully legal. The law allows that. And then they said that based on the income tax identification number, which is what is used for giving loans to people who don't have a social security number in the US, those mortgages that are given out to undocumented people, those mortgages perform much better.
Is that right?
People pay back much better, much higher rate, in fact, very little default than the typical American mortgage borrower. And if you pause for a moment and think about it, you would realize that if a person has crossed the desert and the mountains and risked his life or her life to go and make a living, why would that person default on a loan for the house, which gives so much meaning to his or her life, right? So this is a fact. The same goes for, okay, so we are talking about taxes. So this is just a fact that when people are working, and they have already paid taxes, they are sending money, their own money to their families. That should not be. That there is a economic argument and a moral argument that you should not tax them twice. But suppose you still want to tax them. People work so hard, and and every $5 or every $10 means so much to them. They would not want to pay the tax. So you are going to force people not to pay taxes. And how would they do that? By going to alternative channels to send money. How many people will you go after? Laws are made. One is for collecting money and making the society run well. Another one is if the society wants to violate a law because the law did not make sense or has become outdated, you need to change the law. The law is what we make of it to make the society run, right? Imagine how would you administer a tax on remittances? You cannot administer the amount you will pay to the federal agents, income tax authorities, just to administer going after people who are not paying taxes. That amount will be much larger than the amount you will collect in taxes.
Yes.
So I would say taxing remittances is both morally as well as practically not meaningful.
Yeah, this issue is linked to what we were just discussing with Ambassador Feely a while ago on some of Trump's promises, right? And one of them, well, that they have been studying, actually more the vice president himself, is taxing remittances. So it will counter actually the notion of sparking development in Latin America that would in turn change the scope and nature of migration flows. How do you see, Dominica, in terms of how can we say set the ball rolling? Is it a matter of organizing funds in the United States? That we have the Fondo Jalisco, the Fondo Oaxaca, the Fondo Michoacán, or the Fondo México, the Fondo Salvador, and how can these resources be taken to the development of communities and regions in our countries? Who is going to decide what project is the right one? For instance, no, is this an irrigation project, or is a power project, or is education or rebuilding schools, or how do you envisage this link? That we have to find out a way to do it, and that everybody has got it clear, right? Otherwise, it's not going to fly.
Well, I think it's important to understand remittances isn't a one solution that will cover the whole magnitude.
No, no, of
right?
course
Very
not.
complex. It's a piece of an ecosystem that needs to be established. So why are people coming to the States? Opportunity. So if you solve X opportunity in Mexico, will they stay? Well, what does that infrastructure of opportunity look like, and who funds it?
Hmm.
So Enrique and I, we kind of partnered, and a lot of my quest coming to you was McKinsey had been doing all these research and studies on the economic state of Latinos in the United States, who we are, our contributions. They found that about 30 to 50% of our revenues, particularly recent arrivals, are sending money back home. And so that sparked sort of this idea that could there be an education process where, yes, meet the needs of the family, but could through hometown associations, El Club de Zacatecas or Michoacán or all the states, that are receiving and are organizing the diaspora to send money back. Now, that is not a new idea. This idea has shown up many times in one of those ways, tres por uno, where it was about the government matching funds from the diaspora to build out many of the projects you laid out, whether it's an airport, whether it's a school. Did it work? The question, the answer is sometimes, but we had Enrique on a panel, he said no. So I have to take his word for it that it didn't work. But the idea needs to be reshaped, and maybe there's an opportunity to explore what vehicles. Now, the point about the banks is important. So let me sort of finish this piece.
Yes, sure.
The fintechs are emerging as a powerful part of the ecosystem to deploy capital where the big banks don't want to. So that's happening in the US for the Latino small business. 97% of Latino businesses in the United States are under $1 million in annual revenues. They're tiny. So who's lending the money? It's going to be through fintechs or what we call CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions. Some of them and credit unions are thinking through what other services do US Latinos need, right, that they could provide in the portfolio. Well, remittance is an important service. And so kind of the question we have is in the ecosystem, when we look at remittances, we look at the financial literacy is important. We look at the partners that we need in the fintech. And then we look at also the established groups, the diaspora, where are they organized? And can new products be developed? So one of the things that our program focuses a lot is how do we invest in more Latino-owned, Latino-designed businesses that can address some of the very unique challenges. There's a new app called Felix Pago. And if you want to learn about new apps out there in the marketplace, they're competing with Western Union, they're competing with MoneyGram, those kind of apps. The MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, they put a report out, and they're investing in those Latino-owned businesses that are looking at using technology where we already are fluent. WhatsApp. How many people here have WhatsApp on their phone? Raise your hand. Okay, many people use it. So Felix Pago, through WhatsApp, can send a remittance to your relative. That easy, right? Now, the question is, do you have a
So
banking
I'll give you
account?
my number so you can start sending me whatever you might want to.
So the importance of understanding the technology, understanding the unique needs, I think, Enrique, we are at an exciting time where we can sort of develop the technology and the processes, learn from tres por uno, what didn't work. And the big issue around the world is we lack trust, right? But the pandemic forced us to trust each other, so we can do it. So I think the opportunity here is looking at remittances as an ecosystem, as a marketplace. Who's playing in the market? What technology is important? How do we build trust? Mexico, during the pandemic, deployed social aid to many people in the rural areas and incentivized them to open a bank account. Well, what more can be done? What kind of partnerships and education? So I'm optimistic that it's going to take, and this is the research we're doing, focusing on the US, the senders. What's the psychology there? It's an emotional thing. Remittances is, if your mom calls you on her deathbed, you're going to find the money and send it overnight. And you want to figure out what's the fastest way. You don't worry so much about the cheapest way at that moment, right? As you get education, you start thinking, well, why should I give 5%, 10%? Some of our people are paying up to 20%. So is there a way, it starts there, but then the person who receives it, in the research we know that's a very gender thing. The brother will send it to the brother or the father, not the wife or the sister. So by the time the woman gets it, it's going to be a little less, especially if it's cash. So how do we empower the women to be the ones that receive it through the technology? Because we know in just history and no matter where in the world, the diapers are going to get bought and the tequila is not. So the importance of understanding the ecosystem, who the players are, it's two equations, the sender, that psychology, and the receiver. And it's a lot of education. That's the como se dice, el dicho, el hecho, hay mucho,
Trecho.
right? So that's where we are. And we have to figure out how to solve for that.
So definitely, I mean, there are some prerequisites that we need to cover here. One has to do with technology, financial education, financial inclusion, digitalization. All those things are like the basic toolbox that we need in order to actually dream on some things bigger. But you mentioned something that struck me, not this time, the previous one that you spoke, about the psychology of the guy sending money to Mexico from LA or Chicago, right? They normally send the average of remittances per month by Mexicans is $300, right?
Almost 4.
Almost 400?
Yeah.
Wow, more so then. What if I am working in a farm in California and I need or have the custom or whatever of sending $400 per month to my mother in Los Altos de Jalisco, right? If they were to set up a business in Los Altos de Jalisco, perhaps the next month he doesn't need to send $400 because they're already making money back there, right? And so on and so forth. And eventually may happen that the guy living in a farm in California says, why am I living here? I'm going to go to my hometown because I have more wealth now accumulated there with the work of my relatives there than when I left, right? And the question here, or the word here, the main word perhaps is opportunities. You have mentioned this. If they were looking for those opportunities going to the US, but now they have sparked those opportunities back home in Oaxaca or in Los Altos de Jalisco or wherever, they might not see that opportunity as a golden thing. Maybe the golden thing is already back home. So we have to sort of create a virtuous circle through which these remittances go to the little towns, to the little aldeas or whatever it is, and then and who is going to? That's my thinking, but please correct me. That perhaps the best ones to know what kind of a project is needed in Uruapan or in whatever, in Amanalco, state of Mexico, whatever, is those locals. They know that they need two new pharmacies, or they need a clinic, or they need an irrigation system, or they need, I don't know what. So they should be calling the shots and say, listen, you guys, send us money in order to fill this gap here or to fill this necessity here back home. And that's going to be almost an insurance that that business is going to work, is going to fly. I mean, where's the problem? I mean, everybody knows that the pharmacy is needed. Have the goddamn pharmacy set up, no? I don't know if you want
Can
to comment on this,
I'll
but
just say my whole career, 28 years, has been around advocacy of Latinos in the United States. Giving scholarships to kids to go to college at the University of Southern California. Did that for over a decade. And the stories of, we would do a fancy gala at a hotel in Beverly Hills, and the wait staff is all Latino. And I remember this one time, and it connects back to sort of what people come for to the United States. We honored a young woman who's finished at the top of the university going to medical school, first generation in her family, Mexican American. And she dedicated the award that night to her mother, who had been a maid for 25 years at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. And that hotel, if you've seen the movie Pretty Woman, that hotel, that's that hotel. And that night, the whole staff came with flowers, and the honoree was her mother, who had crossed everything for that moment in one night for her daughter to become a doctor in the United States. And that woman went on to become a special fertility specialist. But the reason she did all that was so that her child could have that opportunity. And I believe that if we can paint that picture that in Mexico there's those opportunities. My boss has a beautiful home in Mexico and he loves Mexico. He's a Mexican restaurant resident, not restaurant, resident. And he just loves the people and the warmth. There's a genuine happiness here that unfortunately through the migration, you're isolated. People want to be with family. So if you can create those opportunities here, it's a natural. This is why Enrique and I were so excited
yeah,
to think differently and to to have leaders in the space, whether it's US Treasury, whether it's the State Department, talk about remittances as a powerful way to mitigate the crossing of the border. And I think that the diaspora on the other side, if their relatives could have a better life here, I think they would come back and join them too. So I think it's
yes,
how we position that narrative that
exactly.
every opportunity is in the United States. I don't think so. I think that we have many opportunities in many beautiful places around the world.
Yeah,
Mexico is one of those top.
this issue would not be politically so explosive if, for instance, in this case, the Americans knew that, okay, this group of Mexicans come here to work for 10 years, and then they will go back. That would be
That was
I
the
mean, would
Bracero
change
program. But Enrique,
the
that was the
chemistry.
Bracero program, and it worked
Yes,
for many years.
but I mean, that would change the chemistry of the debate. I'm not saying that it's going to be a solution, but would change the chemistry of the debate. But I think it's a good moment to ask again. Sorry, Dilip, to abuse from your participation on these diaspora bonds that you is something that has been created between Kenya and the government of Kenya or Kenyans abroad, or why don't you explain a little bit about this?
Yeah. So the question about how to make remittances more productive uh, when those flows are personal flows, the answer is uh, you can try to come up with indirect ways to encourage people to invest more, which is the investment climate in the recipient community. That is one idea. The other, more direct way, there are two. You could use a bond financing mechanism. So we're not talking about links
Can you
between.
spell that out? Because
Yes,
how does it
so
go?
the bonus, like the security,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the
So
financial instrument, the bond.
there's a bond for Kenyans.
Right. So what you could do is, let's say, I mean, the best two good examples are, Israel and India. I think Israel was the first one who started it in 1951 and has continued throughout its history to issue bonds to Israeli people abroad, to the diaspora, to raise funding. Every year they raise about $1 billion, and last year they raised 2.7 billion because of the conflict. In the developing country context, India did a diaspora bond in 1998. That was the time of Asian financial crisis, and they were worried about running out of foreign exchange. So they issued a diaspora bond. They call it Resurgent India Bond. They were planning to raise $1 billion. In 6 weeks, they got 5 billion subscription. They were selling bonds at $2,000 denominations to Indians in foreign countries, US, Europe, and Gulf countries, Singapore. Indians are everywhere. They are the largest. Indians are the largest migrant community in the world. They are the largest remittance recipient as well in the world. They received $120 billion last year, and this year we are expecting India to receive $129 billion, one country, in 1 year. So India raised that year $5 billion, and then 2 years later went to the market again and raised another $4 billion, so $9 billion. And then Nigeria is the other example. In 2017, Nigeria raised $300 million by selling bonds, about $2,000 face value bond, issued to the Nigerians in the US and in Europe. The way it would work is, let's say a Nigerian, actually you mentioned Kenya, we are with the World Bank and the government of Kenya actively trying to do a diaspora bond for them, for Kenya's benefit, where the plan is that Kenya would issue a bond, maybe $500 or a $1,000 face value bond to Kenyans living in the United States, in the UK, and in the Gulf countries like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Riyadh, let's say. So the idea is that the Kenyans in these countries, let's say in New York, depending on whether the Kenyan migrant is a doctor, then probably has thousands of dollars sitting in a checking account. Okay, they have assets in the saving account and in investments. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about money that is in the checking account where the interest rate in the US is zero. I think it's zero here as well. I have never got more than 0.12 cents as annual interest rate on my checking account in my bank in my entire 30 odd years of history in the United States. So let's say if a doctor has a few $1,000s sitting in his checking account, or if a driver or a cleaner in a hospital has maybe a few $100s or maybe $2,000 sitting in the checking account, or it could be an undocumented person with maybe $1,000 sitting under the mattress because there is no place to put the money in. The idea is to target that by issuing a bond where you say, we will give you 5% interest rate in dollar terms. You buy one bond, or you can buy 100 or 1 million, depending on your abilities. The bond is fully repatriable. It's a 5-year bond that locks in the money for 5 years. The bond is issued by either the government of Mexico or a private company in Mexico. It could be a small, medium enterprise as well in Mexico. It issues a bond, 50 million, 20 million when we get to a stage, or maybe $2 billion. And the bond is marketed to 100,000, 200,000, maybe a million people in these countries. So what we are trying to do here is to change the bond market upside down. Right now, when Mexico issues a bond, $1 billion, it is bought by around 100 institutional investors, fund managers. Each bond is maybe $1 million denomination, right? We are trying to flip that and say that we will issue bonds that are denominated $1,000 and sold to maybe 1 million Mexicans. And if 1 million Mexicans buy these bonds, it adds up to billions of dollars. The money is locked in for investment purposes, building roads, solar energy, or motor cars, or running small and medium enterprises, hospitals as well. And then it's a simple bond that pays interest to the people. And because people are interested in that project, which means that the bond issuance must be structured in consultation with the diaspora, with the migrants. If you did that, the chances of success is very high. And when you talk to the Mexican migrants, or I have not talked to Mexican migrants, but I have talked to Indians, Filipinos, Jamaicans,
No,
Kenyans, Nigerians.
I'm sort of ashamed that we don't have this in Mexico. I mean, whether we have a Mexico bond.
You know, with 67 billion, 68 billion coming into your country, Mexico could easily raise per year $10 billion of bond financing using diaspora bond. And the diaspora bond, and this is a very, very important point I'm going to make, so let's note this, will have a much lower interest rate than the interest rate the government is paying right now on its debt. And that is because when you do an institutional bond, a normal bond, sovereign bond, the benchmark is the so-called SOFR, you know, the interest rate, which is running around, or you call it US Treasury rate, which is roughly 4.5% to 5%, just the base. For the migrant, the base is that 0% that they get when they put the money in the checking account or under the mattress. So right there, you have 400 basis points or 4% discount. Then the sovereign, the country risk, the sovereign risk, the institutional investor in New York, for example, is going to ask for a higher interest rate just to take care of the risks of Mexico associated with the investment. For the diaspora, at any point of time, for the Mexican migrant, the risk associated with Mexico is lower than the risk perception of the fund manager in New York. So both counts, you will get much lower pricing. My sense is that the interest rate, if for the institutional bond is 7% or 6%, for the diaspora bond, it could be as little as 5% or lower. When you have lower cost financing, you can do projects that are socially more relevant, which tend to have lower returns and higher risks. Lower cost funding is really important for doing socially meaningful investments.
Of course.
So I would say that is definitely a path that should be explored by Mexico.
Yeah, something we should do is to lock up the door and don't leave Dilip, so we can hire him to set up the Mexican bond market for the diaspora, and Domenika and Diego will be able to sort of spread the gospel in the United States that now we have a Mexican bond, something like that. But actually, what I like a lot about this, Dilip, is that you have tested it already. I mean, it's not something that is theoretical. How those funds are used, that's a different ballgame. Or, I mean, that's something we have to refine, say.
If I may add, we are actively in the World Bank Group looking into supporting these kind of bonds by linking the bond to specific projects. So in other words, it will be in the bond contract that the money will be used for a specific project, maybe 2 projects, 3 projects, but it is a contractual obligation. And when you have a project finance obligation of that kind, organizations like Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which is where I'm working now, MIGA, and there are many organizations, BID, for example, we can provide a guarantee against breach of contract. The money cannot be misused.
I see. Now, just one quick question. I mean, it's just yes or no. Is the World Bank working with Mexico to set up or develop a bond market like this?
Not yet.
No,
There
not yet.
hasn't been any request yet.
So, well, we have two choices. We lock up the door, or we go to Washington as a pilgrimage to Dilip's offices in Washington, D.C., in Pennsylvania Avenue, to ask them for this support. Diego.
Let me just say, if you're able to organize the bonds, we're able to help you meet some of the more affluent Latino diaspora on the other side who can invest,
Absolutely.
right? So it takes
So
both
this is
ecosystems.
exactly where I wanted sort of to land it, that this seminar would give us the key players, right? And how to go about it. Finally, go ahead.
Yes.
We have like,
No, just I wanted to share this sense of opportunity and optimism we have around this topic, and that's what has been guiding us from the Aspen Institute Latinos on Society program. So basically, throughout the year, we organized a couple of roundtable discussions with key leaders from government, from the private sector, from think tanks and universities, and also from community organizations that are the closest to our community members. And identified basically that the different sectors have a very important role to play, from financial literacy that community organizations can focus on by deploying these efforts in the community, to ways in which the private sector can better tailor the products they are developing to meet the needs of the Latino consumers that send remittances, to government identifying ways in which they can make the market more transparent. Because as Dilip mentioned before, it is a market that is not super transparent. There is a lot of hidden fees, and that makes it more difficult for the consumer to choose the option that works best for themselves. So through this work now, we are trying to identify a series of recommendations or guidance for the different sectors to move forward. We would love to also have the opportunity to do these roundtable discussions on the Mexican side, because we understand that one discussion is on the remittance sending side and another discussion is on the remittance receiving side, and the obstacles and challenges might be different. But overall, we see a lot of opportunity because many of these remittance senders, the only point of contact they have with the financial system right now is remittances. And there is a whole gamut of financial services that could be offered to them that would improve their lives. Technology, as Domenika mentioned before, truly broaden our opportunities, broaden our horizons, because now through technology, through machine learning, some of these fintechs can measure or assess the credit worthiness of people who don't have a credit score. So in the US, for example, credit score is super important. If you don't have one, you cannot get a credit card, you cannot get a mortgage, you cannot get a loan. And a lot of people are locked out of this system. But through remittances, now some of these companies are basically assessing the information of how frequently people are sending money, how much, and understanding whether the person would be a trustworthy client or customer for loans. So the private sector is already leveraging the technology. The technology is allowing us to customize, micro-customize almost every single aspect of the offerings to consumers. The challenge is making sure that the community is educated so that they are not taken advantage by predatory players. But we really see a lot of opportunity, and we in the Aspen Institute basically are connectors. We set the table for important conversations, and we try to find a common ground among all these players.
Domenika, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah. So here's what I want to ask a couple questions because we're researchers, and I like the word in Spanish, investigadores, right? How many of you here, a lot of young people, are you on social media? Raise your hand. Yeah. Come on. Some of you are on social media right now.
Pues
So
sí.
raise your hand. Okay. So you're on social media. Okay. There is an app that is a Latino owned, Latino designed, US Latina, Mexican American, Suma. Have you heard of Suma? Okay. So Suma is financial literacy. It talks about investments and stocks. It talks about basic concepts, and it's kind of funny. So it's meant to be bicultural, but an opportunity. How many engineers? We have university. How many engineers do we have in the room? Raise your hand if you're an engineer. Okay. All right. How many so marketers, communications, raise your hand. Okay. How many economists? Raise your hand.
How many
Okay.
poets?
So there's an ecosystem right here. How many of your families receive remittances from the United States? Raise your hand. You have a responsibility. You can get together and do a round table. The engineers, the social media, those that family receive money, and start thinking through, how can we make this better? How can we educate our parents or our uncles or whoever's on the other side to say, what kind of projects could we fund? We're seeing more and more young people really come up with the best solutions. So what we'd like to do is to ask you to do some of this work, and we are going to look for partners because we are only going to have half of the equation in the United States. And this is what the work that Diego is leading. We want to come back, and we were telling Enrique, we like it so much here, I want to come back to Guadalajara, which is one of the top recipients as well, and sit down with some of you. What new technology, what new education? Look at Suma, and maybe you develop one similar, and you start something viral.
We could
But
actually
here's the thing.
we could actually work with the Universidad de Guadalajara,
Absolutely.
and I mean they have lots of resources to spread the word to. I mean, it's a tremendous university.
But I think the opportunity here is that we don't have to wait for government or a big
Yes,
company to do it for us. You can come up with that solution. You can create the jobs. We're seeing this, and this is what's so exciting. There's
exactly.
always dark days ahead. That is the history of humanity. There's always different characters that come up, but we can't live in fear. And I believe we need to take the onus back. And these are beautiful countries that we come from. And so I think we need to really take a lot of pride and be part of the solution set. So we're so excited, Enrique, that you've invited us. And we want to look for those partners, because to just create something with only US Latinos at the table doesn't make sense, because we need also to have partners in all of you. So that's basically the call to action today.
To go just full circle, I will finish in Spanish. La idea es que no entiendan nada ellos de lo que voy a decir, sobre todo Dilip, que es un espía que viene del Banco Mundial. Eh, la idea es que no entiendan nada. Entonces, bueno, el punto es que es un tema quizá no tan sexy como otros que puedan ustedes ver en la FIL, pero me pareció que es de una enorme importancia. No lo visualizamos mucho esto, pero cuando ve uno las cifras y ve uno el potencial que tiene esto, dice uno, bueno, es que esto le puede cambiar el rostro de nuestro país. Y además regionalmente, porque sabemos que parte de esos dineros van a Michoacán y parte de esos dineros van a Tabasco, en fin, y hacen un beneficio familiar insustituible por el momento. Y en momentos, como decía Dilip, de dificultad, se convierte en una especie de seguro social, usando la mayor expresión de la palabra, para que la gente pueda tener una opción de vida. Entonces, lo que hemos explorado el día de hoy, la verdad que para mí ha sido muy aleccionador y les agradezco mucho a los tres. Not to Dilip, I don't thank him. Em, vamos a tratar de seguirle la pista a este asunto bien y poder venir quizá el año que viene, Dominica, con una propuesta muchísimo más acabada, o a lo mejor en pocos meses, ni siquiera necesitamos esperar a la FIL, ¿no? Si avanzamos bien, a lo mejor con la construcción de estos bonos, el Mexican Diaspora Bond podría ser una opción, ir viendo por dónde entramos y que sea este el primero de la serie, digamos, en cuanto a cómo armar esta cuestión, porque además creo que los tiempos y políticos que pueden venirse son muy duros para los mexicanos allá, los mexicanos acá, para sus familias. No sabemos cómo van a venir las cosas. según nos dijo el anterior ponente, el embajador Philly, pues él sí teme lo peor y creo que pues vale la pena actuar con esa idea. Si no pasa lo peor, pues qué bueno, pícale a tu botón.
Dice, don't get mad, get motivated. No te enojes, motívate.
Sí, exacto. Entonces creo que es una buena forma de terminar esta sesión. Agradecerles a todos ustedes por haber estado aquí. Espero que les haya abierto en algunos sentidos los horizontes de aquellos que están en el mundo de las finanzas, que están en el mundo de la comunicación, que están en el mundo de la política, que están en el mundo de los medios, que están en el mundo de la economía, de las relaciones internacionales. Este es un tema que atraviesa todo eso. Y creo que ahora va a comenzar un nuevo gobierno aquí en Jalisco. Puede ser una buena oportunidad también de decir, bueno, ¿cómo visualizamos a mediano, largo plazo la presencia de capitales jaliscienses que están en Estados Unidos aquí y en qué tipo de cosas se pueden usar para detonar aún más el desarrollo del Estado? Entonces creo que yo siempre lo he dicho que creo que el principal aliado económico que tiene México es sus propios nacionales fuera del país. Andamos luego buscando que llegue inversión de Finlandia y de Australia, de no sé dónde, y ahí los tenemos. Podrían venir realmente a invertir con muchísimo más entusiasmo que otros que vienen nada más por el hecho de sacar un provecho, un beneficio económico, un lucro. Y creo que esto puede ser una diferencia cualitativa y cuantitativa brutal para México. Entonces espero que pues les haya parecido interesante, que lo tengan ahí en mente como uno de los temas relevantes a seguir la pista. And I want to thank my colleagues Dilip, Domenika, and Diego for making the time to come here and to share your thoughts and proposals in order to make this happen. Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias. Thank you, Dilip.